Hello everyone and welcome to our second lecture here in chapter 18. In this lecture we're going over the Muslim so-called gunpowder empires. In the first section we took a look at the Ottoman Empire. Now we're going to take a look at a case study of cultural blending, the Safavid Empire. So let's get into it. So let's set the stage. First thing you guys need to think about is what is cultural blending? And then you have to go there and think about, once you know what cultural blending is, what traits a society can have that actually prevent cultural blending, what traits of a society can actually help cultural blending. And then from there, doesn't matter in terms of the subject, think if there's any current examples of cultural blending that exist. All right, I want you to think about that for a second. All right, so just to help you out, if you don't know what cultural blending is, it's the blending of cultures, to do something that you guys always like to do. It's taking a certain culture or cultures and having them mixed together and something coming out of that mixture. And the United States is a perfect example of that, being that you have people from all over the world for centuries have come here. Now, what are some traits of society that can help that? Well, there's, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and so forth. But what are some traits that actually can prevent cultural blending? Think of racism, think of religious intoleration, focusing on, only certain groups of people. So like a strong nationalism or what is called nativism can actually help prevent cultural blending. And then I want you guys to think about, what are some examples of cultural blending? We've got them all over the world. Think about the just a mixture of people across the globe, development of new languages, or the fact that you have companies and stuff that are global that start in one country and exist well in another country. There's tons of different examples there, and you should be able to come up with a lot. All right, so let's get into the Safavid Empire and why it's an example of cultural blending. All right. So first off, we have cultural interaction in history leads to exposure to ideas, food, technology, traditions, traits, and so forth. And typically, where does cultural interaction take place? It takes place at crossroads or trade routes and ports and at borders. So basically, where people meet. Think of like the so-called, if the world was all a mall, where would you have interaction? You'd have it at the food court, or on the way to and from different stores or different countries. That's where the interactions take place. It's wherever people mix, we start to see interactions, both beneficial and negative. So the one thing is, it's cultural interaction is going to be beneficial in history to those that are open and willing to adapt and accept change or accept different ideas. And ultimately what we've seen throughout history is those that are openness to it, those that have the most openness to this, are benefiting more than those that aren't. Cultural blending leads to new patterns of behavior in really every single way, whether it's socially, politically, economically, educationally, whatever. You see benefits from it. They may not be directly immediate, but over time there will be benefits generally. All right, so what are some causes of cultural blending? Well, firstly, cultural change can be brought by these things that you see on screen. Migration, okay? People moving to and from, or into or away from certain places. Think of push-pull factors of why a group would actually go to a place versus why they would leave a place. You see trade, that's the obvious one. We always say anything that in history, almost anytime anything happens, trade is a reason. Conquest, so taking over areas, extending control over certain territories by groups. And then religious freedom and or conversion can actually help with cultural change as well. And we've talked quite a bit about that, specifically in the expansion of the Islamic faith and caliphates earlier on in the year, and even in this chapter significantly. And to kind of go back to the first section, to bring in the Ottomans again, they were surrounded and they had a motivation to take more territory. And where they started off was here in Anatolia, and then they expanded outwards from there. But what helped them is they were not only, yes, they were surrounded and they're a militaristic group of people, but they were located on a trade route, a place where people moved to and from. So it brought in all these different things to them, whether it was ideas, money, and so forth. And this actually helped foster their interest in learning, which brought about new ideas, advancements, and so forth. So that's the importance in terms of cultural interaction and really the causes and expansion of it. So I know we haven't got into the Safavids just yet, so these are some really important slides just talking about the generalities of what cultural blending does. So I would star all of these. They're really important to understanding what's going on, and these are actually helping us answer the first three questions that were on the setting the stage slide as well. So remember, blending can actually help in all aspects, or at least it leads to changes in all aspects of life. So this is kind of like, what are the effects of cultural blending? One is you can have the development of new languages. So you can have characters that go from one to another. So in that case, you like the Chinese language system, their interactions with the Japanese lead the Japanese to adopt a similar type writing system. Or if it's you can even see like a bleed in of like Latin and then the development of French and so forth. Or Spanish. Religion, so you can actually see different traditions within the same religion. So we just actually got done talking about one of these changing traditions in the same religion with the Reformation. So think about in terms of like Protestants are still Christian, but you have Catholics. You can see changes in government. You can have the same government, but different interpretations of that type of government. So for example, if you study democracy, the Athenian form of democracy is completely different than the United States form of democracy. You also are going to see ethnic mixtures. So when we get into later on and we start talking about the age of exploration and expansion of empires into the so-called New World or the Americas, we see cultures mix, whether that's mestizos or Creoles in the Americas, so basically natives or Africans with Europeans, which would be mulattoes. We see art and architecture adapted within styles. So, for example, you can see Chinese or European elements of art and architecture in various places where that's not where they're originally from. For example, all across Washington, D.C., you see this Greek and Roman style, classical style architecture. Well, that's a blending of stuff through the past that is extended into an area that isn't where that's from. All right, so now on to the Safavids themselves. So the Safavids, they were fueled by the need for territory and their alignment to Shia Islam. So they were believers that the descendant or their leader had to be descended from Muhammad. So if you guys remember the difference between Sunnis and Shia. Now, they're being squeezed by two groups, and it's the two other gunpowder empires in this chapter. The Ottomans are to their west, and the Mughals are to their east. So the Safavids need a very strong army. Now, one of their strongest rulers is Ismail, and he only took the throne at the ages of 12 to 14, okay, roughly around the area. So he was really young, but he's able to seize Iran and take control of that entire area. And this is important because not only is he able to solidify the area between the Ottomans and the Mughals, but he's able to take the title of Shah and institute his control within that state using Shia Islam as the state religion to help solidify control. Now, he ultimately becomes a religious tyrant, and this is key because this is actually going to be, this factor within the Safavids is going to change. They're going to become a center under Ismail that isn't open to cultural blending, but as they move down the line, they will become open. So he kills all who don't convert, and this is important currently because we see actions that he takes here are held in poor taste by the Sunni Muslims in this area, and it's going to lead to modern conflicts in the 1900s between Iraq and Iran, a Shia state, Iran, versus a Sunni state, Iraq. Now, his son, Tahmasp, I always pronounce the name wrong, so I apologize, expands the empire to the Caucasus Mountains and into Turkey, so he's fighting against the Ottomans, and he ultimately brings Christians into the empire. So this is the beginning of that cultural blending, or at least acceptance. Now here you guys can see what's going on. So this is for all intents and purposes, this is the Safavid Empire in Iran itself. This is the border. and so forth, the Orange area, and you can see that they're fighting in the case of this one. There's some disputed lands with the Khanate of Bukhara. You have the Mughal Empire over here to the east, and then you have the conflict zone between the Safavids and the Ottomans here to the west. And here's the Caucasus, and then this is into Turkey. All right, so now let's talk about the golden age of Safavid rule. So in 1587, they have a Shah, and his name's Shah Abbas. He takes the throne, and he issues several reforms. One, he issues a reform that limits the army's power by establishing an army made up of Persians and Christians that are loyal specifically to him. So there's the military, but he also establishes a separate part that's limited, that's loyal to him. So that protects him and hurts the direct power of the army as well. It's kind of a way to kind of prevent one group from getting too much power. He also punishes corruption and promotes by skill and loyalty. And that's significant. We see this in all societies. Generally, they do better when they promote based on skill and not just loyalty. If it's just loyalty, it's a problem. If you can promote based on loyalty and skill, that's a huge benefit. He starts to hire foreigners into government positions. And this is important, and it's very similar to when we talked about the same practice that the Mongols did. By hiring foreigners into government positions, he hires people that will make the right decision, that aren't linked or have bias to those local areas, just like the Mongols did. So that's important. He actually encourages trade with Christian Europe. So this is important too, because this is the time of the latter part of the Renaissance and Age of Exploration. So that's a huge connection and benefit for not only Europe itself, but the Safavids as well. And he builds a new capital at Esfahan and makes it and turns it into a modern center for learning at this time period. All right, so now we're going to talk about the arts. So Shah Abbas, he focused on the arts, and he was able to do that because there's a lot of riches in the empire at the time. And he focused on bringing Chinese artists, so artisans from the east, to the cultural capital and learning center of Esfahan, and they produced large amounts of artwork for the Safavids. And this actually starts to do a number of things. One, it helps trade and cultural achievements within the Safavid Empire, but it leads to a collaboration between Chinese and Persian artists, to where you start to see a blend of their ideas and techniques. And in particular, we see this in the form of carpets, Persian carpets. And the Persian carpet becomes this big national industry within the Safavid Empire, and it's still a significant trading good today, and it becomes a huge source of wealth for them. And this is an example of cultural blending, because you have Chinese techniques and Persian techniques coming together in the form of rugs, and they're highly sought after by an outside group, the Europeans. All right, so now we just talked about a lot of benefits in terms of the Safavid Empire and them doing well, but the Safavids are going to rise really quickly, but they're going to fall very quickly. Now, one area that the Safavids make a mistake is in the exact same way the Ottomans did with Suleiman I. They make the mistake within successors. They kill, blind, or exile the ablest sons. Many of these rulers of the Safavid Empire do that. And what that ultimately does is it puts the Safavids on the same path as the Ottomans. Okay, but the big difference here, whether it's under the ruler Safi or subsequent rulers, is they're going to fall much quicker than the Ottomans. The Ottomans are going to die a slow, painful death over 400 years or so. The Safavids are going to die fairly quickly or fall very quickly. We're talking about the span of 100 years or so, maybe a little over 100 years until they fall. And what happens is you do see expansion during this period. It's not like there's completely ineptitude. For example, in 1736, we see Shah Asfar expand the empire into India, so they're beating back the Mughals, at least for a point. But he's very cruel, and he gets assassinated by his troops. Well, when that happens, you combine the fact that they have poor leadership and practices and so forth, the empire dies and it disintegrates just a little over 10 years later. All right, that's all I have for you guys. This empire, remember, it's an example of cultural blending where it kind of starts off poorly against it, and then it accepts it, and then you have issues with leadership that leads to its downfall. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one when we talk about our third and final gunpowder empire, the Mughals. Have a good one.